Good evening, everybody. My name's Charlie Bartell, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi, y'all. A little titter. I tell you, that breaks them up in New York, Pennsylvania. That hi, y'all. I've certainly enjoyed this. God, I'm always filled with gratitude. And the speakers have been great. I expect that of Lewis. He knocks me dead every time. And I enjoyed Marcia. But for those that missed that traditions workshop today by Maria, shame on you. That was really enjoyable. I think it. Thank you so much for that. And your friend Laura. I learned more from the Al-Anons often than I do from the alcoholics, because they truly work our steps from a position of love and admiration for another fellowship. The non-alcoholic trustees introduce themselves as, I am a friend of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they truly are. And thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing with us. By the way, you might be interested to know that Lois first asked Bill if she could use the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, certainly. This was in 1950 when it was suggested that they get the Al-Anons into another room. Alcoholics were getting antsy. And then he thought for a second. You see, he'd spent the last 4 years since their publication in 1946 selling the group on the traditions. And you might find this hard to believe that the various groups were as interested in them then as they are now. In fact, many of them would say, Bill, please come talk to us. Talk to the group. We'd love to have you. Tell us about that great white light experience you had. And we want to hear about that spiritual wind blowing through your being. Or tell us where Lois hid those bottles on you. But don't talk about those damn traditions. Things haven't changed much. But he thought for a minute and said, of course you can use them, but only on one condition. And she said, what is that? And that she said that you accept the 12 traditions with them. And she said, of course I will. And that's why I found it so gratifying that you covered that this morning. As a matter of fact, 39 other groups have formally asked to use the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was always granted on the condition that they accept the 12 traditions, if you're going to use the steps. Interesting to know that everybody didn't ask. There are 171 uses worldwide of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't think Bill would mind that much, because he said, after all, he didn't write them. They were based on universal spiritual principles. But that leads to my story, my favorite part of the evening. Self-centered was my problem. It still is. And so you have to be careful. But I've made progress. And that's all that you required of me through your love and understanding. Matter of fact, 3 years ago at this time, I was just thinking about that as I was sitting down here, and I hadn't planned on mentioning this. And I don't think I've ever mentioned it from the podium. My wife is dying of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And she's never been able to see me speak. And when we got married, I knew that she had it. And I had an opportunity to stand for a position in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I said, I'm not going to do it because I want to be with you. And she said, you selfish son of a bitch. Those were her words exactly. She's terse and to the point, and she's one of us. She's a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. She says, perhaps you have something to offer that's needed. And said, we'll be together in heart and our love without you being here with me at all times. And she said, besides that, you pompous bastard, what makes you think you're going to get elected? She had a point. And so I agreed to stand for Trustee at Large U.S. And when I found out that 73 other people were standing, I said, well, no big deal. And for the last 2 years, I've had the privilege of serving as trustee at large U.S. and as World Service Delegate for the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And for that, I'm truly humbled. I didn't plan on being an alcoholic when I grew up. Thought about a lot of other things. I was born in Dallas, Texas. I don't have a ready excuse for being an alcoholic. Everything about my childhood I remember fondly. Both my parents were loving. But unlike Marcia's Italian family, we were German. One of the things that Germans do is they don't show emotion in public. That's a weakness. In fact, when we got married, it was always, you may now shake hands with the bride. That's as emotional as we wanted to get in public. But my parents loved me nonetheless. Everything I remember about childhood, I never remember my parents arguing. I remember them having disagreements, and they'd sit down and logically discuss it and come to a head. I was born in Dallas, but not a place that people that live there call Dallas. I was born in Highland Park. When I was a boy, I remember when my parents had a cook. They had someone that cleaned downstairs, someone that cleaned upstairs, someone that drove the car. And I want to tell you something, you can get used to living like that in a hurry. It ain't half bad. My father was an old wildcatter, and he scored. He was a heck of a geologist. He had his doctorate from Stanford University, and he hit East Texas at just the right time. Came a time when I've got an older brother. He's a geologist as well. Keeps the family business going. But I enjoyed school. I enjoyed everything about it. I enjoyed girls. I wasn't bashful. I don't have any of the things that I could identify with a lot of speakers at this podium. You know, we get here from a million different places in a million different ways, and what we share in common is the pain when we got here and a common solution. That's what binds us into this unique group. I found out early on that being a student was easy for me. I have a condition that used to work a lot better than it does now called eidetic imagery. And that is a fancy way of saying photographic memory. And school was easy. I could make those A's. Remember the first time I came home with a little paper from kindergarten. It had a gold star on it. And my parents just jumped through hoops. They just thought that was the most wonderful thing they'd ever seen, you know. What color pony do you want? And right away I decided that that was what you had to do for success. All you had to do was collect gold stars, and I set out through life to do that. And as long as I got the gold stars, I could do whatever I wanted to do. What a world. So I went through high school, made all A's and that sort of thing. And it came time for me to go to college. Well, I had an older brother that had graduated by this time in geology, and my mother's a geologist and my father was a geologist. So they sent me to the University of Oklahoma. Wagner sends its regards, Lewis. They sent me to the University of Oklahoma to become a petroleum engineer. And I was sort of excited about going away for the first time from home. You see, the thing that mystified me all these times was my parents threw these elaborate cocktail parties. I wasn't invited in, but these were for business purposes and things, and I would observe these from afar, and I would observe you drinking that magic elixir. And it was remarkable. People would change. They'd get more gay. They'd smile. They'd start laughing, and the volume would go up. And I thought, this is what it means to be a grown-up. And these were these big, beautiful, posh parties. So when I went to the university, I thought, that's what I'm going to do. Oh, I'd had some drinks and split some six-packs and things with the boys in high school, but never any serious drinking. I remember my first serious drink. I know it was serious because it had an umbrella and some fruit in it. Probably a vodka Collins. And I'd like to say that I had a sensation like many of you described, that whoo, and that feel it from the toes to the top of your head. And it wasn't necessarily that way for me. I think I got it the old-fashioned way. I just plugged away at it because it seemed important to be a grown-up and do these things. And so my drinking sort of gradually increased over the years there. I went through school and I graduated. Along the way, I acquired a wife because I could do whatever I wanted to, and as long as the grades were up. And I got not one degree, but I got 2 degrees there. But neither one of them were in petroleum engineering. One was in psychology, and the other was in history, because I was interested in both, and took a lot of science along the way. And I'll tell you, with a degree in psychology and a degree in history, it qualifies you to sell used cars, and that's about it. So I was asked what I intended to do, and I said, well, I thought I'd go to college. I need to get a master's degree. I got a master's degree in mathematics from Harvard, and I got a master's degree in psychology. What did I do then? I do what I do. I went to school. I ended up getting a doctorate in experimental psychology. I was interested in research. I was interested in publishing. And that's what I did. I conducted a lot of research. I'm sure you're familiar with all the research I did. For goodness sakes, probably have a copy of it at home on your coffee table. My master's research in psychology, for instance, was on the effect of ionizing radiation on bar pressing behavior in the white rat. Surely you're familiar with that. My doctorate research was on the perception of geomagnetism in the Belgian homing pigeon. You see, I discovered that you had to be careful, and if you picked an obscure topic that no one else had dealt with, no one could question you. It just automatically generated a gold star. And after I got the doctorate, I looked around and thought, well, what will I do? I went to school. I had the opportunity to go over and do a postdoctoral with Lynn and I Tinbergen at Oxford University. And so I did that. But ultimately, there came a time when I had to do something. Although the checks were still coming from home, they were coming reluctantly. I had a family. I had a little boy and a little girl and a wife, and we lived pretty well. But I sort of got this proverbial message from home that said simply, get a job. I looked around at what I was qualified to do, and still at that time it pretty much came down to sell used cars with all those degrees. It was a different time. This was 1966, or perhaps teach. And I thought teaching had a bit more panache. Well, I sent out my vitae curriculi around to a number of departments. That's PhD talk for resume. And I remember I lined up 5 job interviews. So I allotted a 3-week period to go around these different places and interview, and I let them know it was their lucky day I was available. And they were interested. I'd published enough that that's what they were interested at the time, and it was the height of publish and perish. And they were looking for someone that would go into their lab and knock out 2 or 3 things a year and make them look good. Remember that first interview was at Auburn University. Now all this time I didn't think drinking was affecting me in any way at all. I knew that I'd increased a little bit my intake, but I thought that was just a natural product of age. I go to Auburn to interview, and they didn't have an airport, which didn't impress me right off the bat, so I had to fly into Columbus, Georgia, and drive into Auburn. And my instructions were simply to show up at the chairman's office at 8 o'clock the next morning. So I checked into the local motel and everything, and 8 o'clock promptly I knock on his door and go in and introduce myself, and he said, well, how did you find us? And I said, remarkably, you're on the map, and the interview started going downhill from there. He says, well, you have a class to teach in about 5 minutes, so follow me. And I hadn't been told that I was going to do this, and so they marched me down, and I go in, and I realize it was a setup. Psychologists, being weird ducks, they decided to test their first intensive pressure interview, stress interview that they'd ever done to see how this would work. I walked in, and all the graduate students were in there, and the entire faculty, and a few other students. And that sort of thing doesn't bother me very much, to tell you the truth. I just rocked back and said, all right, you bastards. And I gave them an hour of the effect of ionizing and hard radiation on bar pressing behavior in the white rat. They got a lot more information than they even bargained for. I had the blackboards covered with evolved solved equations. I brought that out with my master's in math and just stoned them right on it. And it was so involved, I thought, none of them can even ask a question about this. I ended up teaching 5 more classes that day. Sort of cut off my nose to spite my face. And they took me into the lab and showed me all this sort of thing. And the day it was hot, and apparently things were pretty nice, because at the end of the day they said that they were interested in talking to me, and they'd like to see me move to Auburn, and said that the azaleas are in bloom and it's a loveless, loveless city. And wouldn't I like to go out and see the azaleas, or would I rather come to the chairman's chairman's home and have a cocktail? I thought, some choice. And not surprisingly, I opted for that cocktail. You know, we as professional drinkers often don't notice how the amateurs drink, I'm afraid. We surround ourselves with light drinkers. Makes us feel good, not out of place. I was wrestling down about my 3rd drink when one of the assistant professors says, you know, Dr. Bartell, one of the things we're most proud of here at Auburn is that we do not allow the sale of alcoholic beverage within a mile of the campus. Well, scratch Auburn. I finished that drink, got up and excused myself, and drove away in that rental car. You see, alcohol is making major decisions in my life, and I'm unaware of it. I took the first available flight out of Columbus, Georgia. The next place I went to interview was University of Washington in Seattle. And that was nice and went sort of well. And the next interview I had was Berkeley. 1966, Berkeley. Berkeley was happening. It was exciting. I started to stay in Berkeley, but I went on further. I had these 2 other interviews, and I felt obligated to make them, and so the next one was Southern California, University of Southern California. I never saw so many blondes in my life, and legs would blind you. They just went on forever, the legs, I remember. But I had one more to go to, and I flew in and I landed in an airport called Moisant Field. That's New Orleans' airport. I get in a taxi to go downtown, and I asked the taxi driver, because it was getting late in the evening, it was 11 o'clock that night, and I'm going to the hotel, and I said, what time do the bars close? He was confused by the question. He said, why would bars close? I had found civilization. The chairman of the department at Tulane suggested that I might drop out that morning and see them. So I went out and got there about 10 and everything, and we talked and things, and he says, I want to take you to the faculty dining room for lunch. Why don't you go around and look at our facilities? And so I did, and We went in for lunch about 11:45, and there were carafes of wine on the table. And I said, "Whoa, the carafes of wine, what's this?" And he said, "Well, it's one of the perks of teaching here. There's no charge for that. At 1 o'clock, I signed a contract to teach at Tulane University." Not gonna give that up. Hell, they might give me my seat in heaven if I didn't sign right away. I'd like to describe to you a long, long history of my successful professorship, but it didn't work out that way. You see, the research that I did after moving down there consisted of one bar stool to the next. Oh, I showed up and taught the classes, and I made some noise in the lab, but I never really got around to doing any of that serious research. One year led to the next year, to the next year. And in my 4th year, I went to the chairman in December and said, "I'd like to take a year sabbatical." I said, "I've got to get back to my research." And he said, "I'd love to see you do that, but you haven't worked with us long enough to take a sabbatical with pay." And I said, "I just want to use the equipment. I don't want the pay." And he too readily agreed to that. He said, "Yes, I think that'd be an excellent idea." Something had happened in the meantime. I'd lost my mother and father, and I had the wherewithal to pretty much do what I wanted to do. And you know what I wanted to do. I never went back to my professorship. I drank from one bar to the next. And I'd like to tell you that I was some kind of binge drinker, but I wasn't. I was a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week drinker. And I'm not a newcomer. I drank that way for 20 years. At the height of my drinking, I maintained a residence in London, one in Hong Kong, one in New York City and Manhattan, one in San Francisco, and a home in New Orleans. I had hired enablers, and their job was to get me on and off of airplanes. Of course, I thought I was a jet setter. Interesting, I knew most of those folks, but they would turn and run the other way when they'd see me coming ultimately. And I drank around the world like that for years and years. And I was living what at one time might have been your dream, and I want to tell you it was miserable and it was horrible. Along the way, interesting things started happening to me. Funny things happened too. You know, I never got a DWI. Why? My lawyers told me if I drove a car, they'd break both my legs. They made sure I had drivers. They knew what, they said, if you had an accident, they'll own you. And I started having keepers, you know, this is no way to live. But fun things happened. I remember one time, though, I went into a bar on Royal Street in New Orleans. See, I'd lost my car. I couldn't find it. A common occurrence among drunks. But I always had insurance to back this up. I would park it in a commercial parking garage, because not only do they give you the time you entered, which can be useful information, they also give you the address. You can find them. And I would crash in some hotel around there. Well, I'd checked out of this hotel, and I go into Sloppy Jim's, and I walk up to the bartender, and I know him, and I hand him this receipt, and I said, "John, I'm having some trouble. I can't find my car." He looks it over and chuckles a bit. I said, "Well, do you know where it is?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Where is it?" He said, "San Francisco." Wrong pocket, wrong sport coat. It turned out I had one out there that was rented for 6 months, clocking away on an American Express card, and everybody was happy. That sort of thing. That's no way to live. The last 2 years of my drinking, along the way, my wife came in, and I'd made a number of investments, and surprisingly, for some stupid reason, they all did well. You know, it's one of those strange things. But one of the things I had was the #1 radio station in New Orleans. It was actually an easy listening thing, but it was one of these program formats out of New York, so it's all you needed was a third-class engineer to run it. And I had this manager and ran that thing, and it did real well. Bayou Stereo, all music, all the time. And the manager and my wife walked in one day, and I thought, this is unusual. They're holding hands. And she explained to me that they were in love and they were taking the children and leaving. And I don't know what possessed me, but the old psychologist came up in me at that moment. All I'd seen was my mother and father settle disputes, and I said, let's be adult about this. And I said, I'll go in and sit down and talk this over. And I suggested, instead of doing something irrational like moving the children and jerking them out of school and things, that what we would have would be a trial separation. About 6 months, then we're going to all get together and make some real decisions. And they agreed to this, and I moved out the next day. Moved into an apartment that I got so I'd be close to the children, of course. And the following morning at 6 o'clock, bang, bang, bang on the front door, and I was served with papers for deserting my family. I'd been set up. You know? Oh, I did the only thing that a sensible person can do. I went to Hong Kong. It just seemed like I just kept making one irrational decision after another. Remember, before I left, I told this lawyer, I said, pay anything you want in alimony. I knew it was deductible, and if they got married, they'd think twice about getting married, but if they got married, it'd stop. I said, keep the child support at a minimum. And when I got back, he was so happy. He said, no alimony. Your child support's only $2,000 a child. And that was in 1971, and that was a considerable amount of money for 2 children, and just total $4,000. I remember writing those checks out every month. I got to the last check just before my daughter turned 18, and my wife says, look, you've been so noble about this and so righteous. Forget that last check. And I thought, oh, wonderful, yeah. And then you could tell everybody, you never paid all his child support, and it'd be true. And I insisted she take it, and she left. And my daughter says, you know, Dad, I'm not sure why you've paid this all these years. Charlie and I have been living with you. Well, something else I forgot. Turns out I'd been helping support my husband-in-law all that time and had no idea. But the kids were growing in a way, and my drinking progressed, and lots of riotous things happened with people like the Internal Revenue and everything. I was always getting in trouble. But they reached a point where I gave up all my homes except the one in Louisiana because I couldn't physically get on and off of airplanes. And the last year of my drinking, I made a real bad mistake. I stopped eating. I was subsisting on empty calories. Food would be prepared and I'd try to eat, but it just wasn't palatable. I knew that I'm losing a little weight. I can understand people with anorexia and bulimia and things because when they look in the mirror, they don't see someone drastically skinny. And I would be aware that I'd lost a little weight, but if I eat Saturday, it'll all come back. That's all I have to do is eat a little bit. And I'd try to eat, but I couldn't. But I could drink. And the last 3 months of my drinking was all in the home. Years ago, I did all my drinking outside of the home. I used to, one year on my Internal Revenue form where it said occupation, I was confused. And so I put down regular in 155 neighborhood bars. Somehow that started red flagging me with those folks. I thought maybe they were just wanted something more poetic, so I got Shakespearean the next year because they had challenged me on that, and I put down wastrel. They didn't like that. But those last couple of months, I would drink, and I would go off into a haze. I'd come back and I'd drink some more. And what I'd always drank, during 90% of all my drinking, was just Jack Daniels and water. I didn't particularly like Jack Daniels that much. I preferred George Dickel and a number of other brands, but you couldn't get those regularly. You get Jack Daniels any place in the world. So I decided to drink that because I could always get it. And that leads me to my last drink. I woke up and I looked at the clock, and it's 7. And at that time they didn't have AM, PM indicators on it, and I said, 7 o'clock. It didn't matter whether it was PM or AM. And I decided to get out of bed. And something was wrong. My legs wouldn't move. I laid there a minute, and then I realized that I started gasping for breath. And when I tried to put it on automatic, it just wouldn't work. And I wanted a drink so bad. And there wasn't anything to drink. I looked over on the nightstand, and there it was. Last night's Jack Daniels. And I gave thanks, reached over and got it, and removed a cigarette butt that was in it. I've always been a neatnik. And I drank that down. And to this day, that's the last drink I've had. That was the morning of December the 5th, 1987. I was 49 years old. That's a long time to abuse your body like that, and in the last year to go without. My autonomic nervous system was shutting down. And I realized I was dying. And I was pleased because I had no answers. I had a lot of questions and no answers. I'd never contemplated suicide in my life, and I'm not sure I'd have the courage to carry it out. But I had my answer, and I didn't have to kill myself. I was dying. I figured I might have a couple of hours if I struggled. And panic set in again because I couldn't get to a bottle of whiskey. And I didn't have the strength in my arms to drag myself out of the bed, down a flight of stairs to the liquor supply. And about that time I heard the back door open. My heart leapt. It was my housekeeper coming. I didn't want to cry out and be pitiful about it and all, so I just waited. And she finally came into the bedroom and said, "Oh, you're still in bed." I said, "Yes. I've decided to stay in bed all day today. I have absolutely nothing planned to do, and so I've just decided to stay in bed." She said, "Can I get you something?" And I said, "Yes, I would like 2 bottles of Jack Daniels, please." And she said, "All right," and left the room. I wanted 2 bottles in case one didn't work. I actually calculated that I could probably get through a half of a bottle and then I'd die. But what if I didn't? Happiness stood drunk as a backup. 2 bottles of Jack Daniels. And I waited sort of patiently. Several minutes went by and I heard some commotion downstairs. Several minutes. Then I heard the back door open. And in walked my son and daughter, which I just thought at the time was some kind of weird coincidence. And they came upstairs, and my son talked to me like no child should speak to his father. He said, "Get out of bed. You're going to the hospital." To which I replied, "What for?" And he said, "We think you have a problem with alcohol." Obviously, Mom had 2 bottles of Jack Daniels on a nightstand there. And I could tell he was serious. And this cold German started crying in front of his children. You see, not only could I get out of bed, but I'd wet that bed. and I didn't want my children to see that. Pride kills more alcoholics than anything else, I'm afraid. And I said, I can't get out. I can't move. And he said to my daughter, pack him some things. And he came over and he ripped back the covers and he picked me up like a rag doll. I was amazed at his strength. Took me out, threw me in the back of a car, automobile, and off we truck. And it gets sort of hazy then. And I don't remember things, but they were checking me into a hospital. And hospitals have regulations. And they have these rules, and they follow them religiously. They're one after another after another. They're afraid of lawsuits and things. And they take your blood pressure and your temperature and your pulse rate and check your credit and all these things that they have to do. Well, they had to weigh me, and I couldn't stand on a stand and they had me in a sling of some kind, sort of jacking me up. I later found out that's what they weigh the cadavers and the bodies in. They got me jacked up on this thing, and I heard the nurse call out my weight. She said 105. And I said, that's ridiculous. I've never weighed 105 pounds since probably the 4th grade. She read it again, 105, and then it gets sort of hazy again. And then I wake up. And I'm in a room, and a nurse comes by and comes into the room to bring something, and she says, oh, you're awake. I'll go get your doctor. And she left the room, and I thought, well, that's strange, you know. My doctor came in, and she's a neighbor and an internist, and she says, I'm glad to see you up. She says, Charles, I've talked it over with your 2 children, and we're going to transfer you to a hospital for alcoholic rehabilitation. Well, in the time since the nurse left and my doctor got there, I had a moment of clarity. I remembered 2 bottles of Jack Daniels, and I had to get back to them some way because every nerve in my body screamed for a drink. And it was all I could think about. So the wheels start turning, and I said, I'll just stop drinking. I don't have to go to a hospital for that. She says, no, I said, well, why don't you just prescribe me Antabuse? I'll take it. I was thinking about that. She said, I'm afraid you have no choice in this matter. I'd been committed. So, okay. And I thought, well, I'll just escape from that place. Can't be too hard. I'm wheeled out of that place into an ambulance. 6 blocks later, $900. I'm unloaded into this place, and I'm into a mysterious area called detox. And that was interesting. They were taking my life signs every 4 hours. They were getting a little tense. I heard them trying to talk to the other hospital and they're taking me back, but apparently they were, good riddance. It seems that if you die in a hospital, they really regret that because it looks bad on the record. So I'm in detox 3 days, 4 days, 5, 10, 15, 20. People are coming and going. Hell, some of them you just stay 3 days. At 28 days in detox, has sort of given up trying to control my life signs, but I've made progress. I'm in a wheelchair. That's almost like being upright. And I'm practicing. I could get about 4 rolls on those wheels before I'd fall over in exhaustion. And the elevator was 60 feet away, and I'm contemplating escape. I'm trying to write checks to any stout lad that'd get me to that first floor and call me a taxi. And they come up to me and say, we've decided to take you to group. Well, by this time I put 2 and 2 together, and they've got some guy down there with an associate degree and calls himself a counselor. If you think a psychiatrist is an unlovely patient, you should check out an experimental psychologist. See, one of the things, I had several chips on my shoulder, and one of them was that research I'd done on the pigeons perception of geomagnetism and Belgian homing pigeon. My second year at Tulane, I'd received a letter from the Nobel Prize Committee apprising me that I had been nominated. I hadn't won yet, but they wanted some copies of that research. I'm still waiting on them to notify me that I've won. And that's the kind of arrogant ass I was. Then they say, we're going to wheel you down to talk to this counselor. So they wheel me down, they open the door, and there he sits, an ex-Dallas Cowboy linebacker who was doing a stint there for a while. And right away he asked me an embarrassing question. He asked me to describe my drinking. Well, I got to thinking about that, musing about that, and I said, you know, he's probably pretty narrow-minded. If I tell him the truth, he'll allow that I'm an alcoholic. So I thought, I'll just tell him what I used to maintain on. And for about the last 3 years, if I had to go do some banking business or some other business, I would just apportion out through a 12-hour period 1 quart of Jack Daniels. And I could get by on that without any drastic thing happening. Normally, during a 12-hour stint like that, I'd do 2 quarts, and had for years. But I thought, you know, 1 quart, he might think that's excessive. So I said, only about 2 pints a day. It sounded like less. Just sounded like less. And sure enough, he allowed it. He thought I had a problem there of some kind, and they could be of some service. So I go into this thing called group. And what I didn't know is he drew the short straw and got me. No one wanted me. Of all the groups there. And I go through 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. You're coming through, taking these, doing first steps, second steps, third. All that stuff was a puzzlement to me. He gave me a big book. I read that. Whisked right through it. Thought that was interesting. It was real interesting. The only thing I did enjoy was they introduced me to this strange group of people. And they told me for fun and free, they came in and talked to us. And they were A&Ers. They were people from A&A. And they'd come in and talk, and they suggested that we get a sponsor. I said, why should we get a sponsor? He said, you want out, don't you? And I said, I'll get a sponsor. Well, this one old boy came through, and his name was Sky. And old Sky agreed to be my sponsor. And the reason I'd asked him to be my sponsor is he'd gone to Harvard, and I thought he was my kind of person. I know how horrible that sounds, but that made sense to me. And so I asked him to be my sponsor for all the wrong reasons, and he agreed to be my sponsor for all the right reasons. And he was there for me. Well, Sky suggested I read the big book, and I said, I've already done that. And he said, read it this time and try to understand it. I was in treatment there for 46 days on top of the 28 days. And I hadn't done a first step or any of those things that other people were doing. I hadn't been talked to, essentially. But the same thing would happen every week. On Friday, they'd roll me down to the director of therapy, and he'd just rave about the progress I was making. And he'd say, by the way, you owe, and it was usually like $9,700 or so for that week, and I'd write a check, and they would suggest that I could benefit from another week. Well, a substance abuse technician came up to me after that last Friday like that and said, do you want to be here the rest of your life? And I answered him with the most honest statement in the world. I said, no, I've got 2 bottles of Jack Daniels waiting on me. And he says, you keep writing those checks, you'll be here the rest of your life. There are a lot of great treatment centers, and a lot of them are for fun and for free. There are a lot of great halfway houses and things out there working on small grants. But this happened to be a large chain of very aggressively, and I think perhaps greedy folks who were running this place. So the next Friday, when I was wheeled up and informed the price, I said, I'd love to pay you, but I'm absolutely broke, have not a penny to the world. And that following Saturday, I graduated with high honors. And I'm happy. Now, somehow my suitcase and a lot of my belongings had disappeared, so I had the classic set of matched luggage that many alcoholics can identify with. I had 2 black trash bags. And I'm stuffing my stuff in there, and I'm getting ready to call a taxi, and I'm putting in, I remember, a plastic wash basin, a plastic urinal. Don't laugh, those things cost $67,000, and I was taking them. I'm loaded up, and I'm ready to call that taxi because I got 2 bottles of Jack Daniels waiting on me. Had no intention. I thought, this party might last a little longer. I've been sober this length of time. I've been away from alcohol. I wouldn't call it even sober, but I'd been dry that length. It might take more than 4 hours for me to die. I might have a real party. I might be able to get 18 hours out of this deal. And guess who showed up? Sky. Get in the car. First step of Alcoholics Anonymous. Get in the car. Get in the car. It's about 9:30 in the morning. Off we go. We go to a 10 o'clock meeting. Now, I liked you folks. I consider you somewhat of a cult. And I thought that this was a great thing for you, but see, this mental giant that I was, I couldn't possibly buy any of these things. First of all, the steps were just awfully baby-like, required a lot of. And so I thought, these are sort of like Boy Scout merit badges. I'm not interested in that. But I went to the meeting, and you all had a twinkle in your eye, and you were all happy to see me. And you were nice folks, and I didn't want to hurt you, so I didn't say much. And we get out of the meeting. I said, well, Sky, time to go home. He said, no, I want to take you to a place now, and then we'll have some lunch. And he took me to the central office and showed me these books that you all had for sale, and he seemed awfully, awfully proud of this. And I thought, damn, Sky, didn't you ever go into the library at Harvard? So we had lunch, went to an afternoon meeting, and then we went to an 8 o'clock meeting that night. Finally, I was really getting physically tired, and I said, Sky, I'd like to go home. So he took me home about 9:30 and said, I'd like to come in and check your place out. So he looks around. In this time, I've graduated from this wheelchair, and I've got a walker. I'm mobile, really, going around and occasionally using a cane. You see, one of the things that they had there was a physical rehabilitation center, and they were sending me when you'd go to recreation and things. They were teaching me to walk again. I have an extreme case of peripheral neuropathy. I got myelin sheath damage in both my legs, and I can't feel the bottom of my feet right now. If the lights go out in here, I'll have to grab something to maintain my balance because I use visual cues rather than proprioceptive feedback to maintain my balance. And it'll never get any better, but that's okay. Well, I take Sky all around. He inspects everything, says it's nice and that, and I managed to slip into my bedroom, and I'd been robbed. Both bottles were gone. I almost panicked, but I went down to where the main bar was, wiped out entirely. I had beer keg tappers down there. I'm not a beer drinker, but any old port in the storm, and both the kegs were gone. Uh-oh. Obviously, since the TV and everything else was still there, the guy had owned a liquor store or a bar and had restocked it off my supply. Sky finally leaves, and I think, I'm so physically tired and the battery might be down in the car. I'll get up first thing in the morning and go buy a bottle. And went to sleep. Ding, ding, ding. It's a doorbell. Sky, get in the car. It goes on like this for week after week. If Sky's not there, someone else is. Like he was reading me like a book. And I'm calling myself working the steps because I want to get rid of Sky. I'm ripping him off like merit badges mean as much to me. You see, both of my families, both my mother and father were very, very religious people. Extremely religious. And their religion was atheism. And if you don't think it takes as much faith to believe that there is no God, I'd consider myself somewhat of an agnostic or something, willy-nilly, you know. Sort of sums up my life anyway. But they were strict atheists. I remember one time I slipped away and went to a church group that was having a little party. And when my parents found out about it, it was the only time I was ever admonished and grounded, because I'd trusted in this superstitious product generated by superstitious man, religion. And so I had no emotional attachment to it. In fact, I felt it was I didn't. If I said the word God, it meant about as much to me as the word bolt or pecan, you know, where you feel an instant warmth when you think about it. So Sky, knowing this, says you still have to have a higher power. I'm not going to let you get away with it. So I made the group my higher power. And although I could buy the committee system, it was easier for 12 of you to pick up a table, and I couldn't budget alone, and this sort of thing. I felt gypped. I just felt gypped. It was just the old selfish, self-centered. I mean, you had a God that could create life. You had a God that could stop time or begin it. And what did I have? I had you. I was gypped. Now, during this time, it amounts to 5 months I've been dry. 5 months. Going to a minimum of 2 meetings a day, seeing Sky or someone else 12 hours a day. And I'm dry. And every nerve in my body screamed for alcohol. I could think of nothing else. It was horrendous. Sky comes by and takes me to the meeting. I said, no, Sky, I've got a car. I'd always been Charles. I became Charlie. You said change something. Well, I could change peripheral things easily. I'd always driven other products. I'd never liked General Motors products. So that day I'd gone down and bought a white Cadillac. Big change. Had all this stuff working for me. And we'd go to a meeting. It was the 449 meeting. Guess what that dealt with? And it was a discussion group. Sitting in that discussion group, and they had a moderator got up and was moderating on the higher power. And I don't know whether you hear a lot of you, but to the ears of an agnostic it sounds sort of smug. It's my higher power, whom I choose to call God. Like if you call it anything else, you're some kind of ninny. Or my higher power, whom I choose to call Jesus. And I think, God, that's getting specific. It came to me, and I refused to share. I just passed. They're going to have to eat out. You see, with the sedatic imagery, I'd read all the conference-approved literature, and I was used to giving at least a paragraph out of Dr. Bob and a snippet out of Pass It On. Always something from the big book. But you were going to have to not have my... And I didn't think that meeting would ever end. And finally it ended. And I went out to get in that new car, and I loved the meetings after the meetings. Pie and coffee was my thing. That was the closest thing to camaraderie I thought you folks had. I went out to get in that car, and I'm thinking to myself, I deserve more than this. Everybody says, let's all go. We decided to go to Shoney's. And I said, no, I'm a little tired. I think I'll just go home. And I fired that up. And this is on the west bank of the Mississippi, in a section of New Orleans called Algiers. And I decided to go to the French Quarter. I hadn't been there. I hadn't had a decent meal since I'm going to the French Quarter and have a real nice meal. It's almost 9 o'clock. That's about the time that people eat there. But first I have to drive over this big bridge, and it's always crowded. And I make my way to that bridge. It took me about a mile to get there, and I turn up onto the ramp and start up on the bridge. And interestingly enough, there are no cars coming or going. A bridge that averages 190-something thousand cars and trucks a day. I drive further up, and I get about a quarter or a half mile up onto it, and it's 2.5 miles across it. And I hear a number, and the number is 49, and it's loud. And I think the bridge police are behind me, and they're on the loudspeaker, and I look in my rearview mirror, and there's nothing there. Radio and the car's off. I drive another 100 yards, 150 yards, and I hear it again. Not as loud, but 49. And sweat breaks out on my forehead, and it's a sweat of excitement. It's not fear. I'm having an auditory hallucination, and I realize that's what it is. And I never knowingly had one, but I had the evidence that I'm having it. And I'm just thinking, isn't this splendid? What's going to happen next? I drive on across, and I take the first exit, Camp Street. That's very symbolic. That's a street of winos. And I'm heading down toward Canal Street. I've got to cross Canal, the big major downtown there, to get into the French Quarter. And my heart's beating noticeably. And I'm keyed up and excited. And I notice that neon is brighter than it normally is. It's almost melting off those signs. And then all of a sudden, everything seems to get so busy. Now, it's a 24-hour city, and people are walking on the steps of the street all the time. And, you know, like the Vieux Carré is not, the French Quarter is not an adult Disneyland built and designed. That's a neighborhood. They've got elementary schools and things there. Families live there and raise their children. So it's an ongoing place. And I finally get to Canal Street. But on the way down, I'm thinking, if I go into a restaurant, I'll be by myself, and they'll say, look at this loser, doesn't have a date, no friends. I'll have to tip a lot to get a table. I don't have reservations, so they'll put me by the kitchen. And I'm making up all these excuses. And I look ahead, and up ahead is a Sheraton Hotel, about 50 stories of a phallic symbol sticking up. And I said, that's my answer. I'll just pull in there, order up room service, have a steak. Didn't sleep well last night. Wake up early in the morning, call Sky, go over and talk to him. There are buses and people walking, and I finally turned right and have to go half a block, drive into the motor entrance on this. And there are tour buses, and it takes me 20 minutes to get in there to drop the car off. Guy gives me the receipt for the car, and I toss him a $20 bill and say, I'm checking in. I walk through the side door there, and it goes doo, doo. Walk in, and it's excitement personified. Big atrium there to the right. Goes up 20 of the stories. And a big wraparound bar with about 200 people in it. And it was the cocktail parties of my youth. I swear I could hear the ice cubes rattle in those glasses like fine Bavarian crystal. Over on the other side are all these seated big groups of leather chairs and on big oriental rugs and little seating groups, and people are just buzzing and talking. And up on a mezzanine level, they've got this huge grand piano, and it was playing these discs, and I swear it was Gershwin himself, and Rhapsody in Blue was playing. And over to the back left is the registration area, and big bank of elevators and escalators going, and things are moving and people are moving. And at that instant, it hit me. I remembered what 49 is. $49 at that time at any Sheraton International hotel was the cost of a liter of Jack Daniels. I never thought that I wasn't going to relapse because I had no defense. I just had people writing hurt on me. And I realized suddenly that I'm doing that. I intend to go over, get a room, and I'll order a bottle of Jack Daniels up. My relapse starts now. And I'd talk to Sky, and Sky talked to me endlessly about relapse. And I said, Sky, it says, we'll have no natural defense against the first drink. We have to redouble our spiritual efforts. What does that mean? He says, it means you pray your rear off. You've got to immediately get in contact with your higher power. Well, that was difficult because my higher power was having coffee and pie at Shoney's across the river. And there was this well-meaning, sweet little lady in my home group, which today is the Strange Camels group of Slidell, Louisiana. But at the time was another group in New Orleans. And I said to her, she said to me often, she says, Charles, I know you're having trouble with your higher power. Borrow my God anytime you want. And said, my God's not too busy that it won't help you too. And I always thanked her, and I always thought, isn't that sweet, but so misguided. But at that instant in the hotel, I decided to do it. The last grand experiment. And I said the first prayer I'd ever said. Oh, I had mouthed the Serenity Prayer, and I'd said the Lord's Prayer, but I only did it so I wouldn't stick out and you'd think I was working the program. I'd like to tell you it was something as elegant as the Serenity Prayer, or something as meaningful as what people call the alcoholic prayer, which is the most honest prayer we say, and that's simply, God help me. But I said this prayer of a spoiled child and threw down the gauntlet to her God in the lobby of the Sheraton Hotel there. I said, all right, God, if you exist, you'll stop me. And for an instant there, I had some real fear, because I'd heard about your Sunday school God and something as magnificent as me. No telling what he had planned. I didn't know whether the earth was going to open in a mighty vault and swallow me whole, or a solid gold bolt of lightning would cleave me in two. And I said this so loud that people around me turned and looked. And nothing happened. You see, there was nothing there. So I walked back to the registration desk, fighting through the crowds of people. I get there, it's almost 9:30, and they've got velvet ropes set up, and I get in line, and I'm waiting impatiently, and 3 people are registering them. And finally, the little girl in the middle looked up, and the hair was stuck to her forehead with perspiration, obviously pulling a double. And she was tired, but she looked up and said, next. And I was ready, and I threw down not a green or gold, but a platinum American Express, and I laid a gold Sheraton Preferred card on top of that and said, I want a room on the 46th floor, please. You see, the 46th floor, from flopping there many times in the past when I was too drunk and the driver wasn't there, was a floor of all suites, and they had a private bar for the sweeties up there. And you could drink in there free. Hell, what those suites cost is a bargain for them. But I was already planning the Bloody Marys if I made it to the next morning. And she looked up at me, and she got a quizzical look on her face, and she said, there's no room at the inn. There's no room at the inn. And a feeling came over me. A feeling of warmth, and of something that I didn't know. Sky later told me that perhaps it was the first time I'd ever experienced love in its truest form. And I said, you know what? And she said, what? And I said, there's a higher power, and his name is God. She reached down and pulled up this house phone and says, "Give me security, I got a live one at the front desk." And then she said, "Don't you know the Republican National Convention started today?" And I said, "I've been sick. I've been out of town lately. I don't know." I got out there just before he was pulling off that new Cadillac, and I said, "I couldn't get a room. Isn't that wonderful?" And I gave him another $20 bill, and I'm here to tell you that's the last alcoholic, I hope, gesture on my part. I've learned to be just as cheap as you other. That's not true. You're the most generous people I've ever met, and you've taught me that. You give of something so much more important than a lousy $20 bill. You give of your time, yourself, and often have to take time away from your own families, which they willingly give because you're out helping another suffering alcoholic. You taught me how to truly give and what was meaningful, and for that I'll always be eternally grateful. I didn't notice it for 2 days, but I knew something was different, and I didn't know what it was. It dawned on me that at that very instant, I didn't crave a single drink of alcohol. It was magically removed. I didn't tell anybody about that experience because I thought I'd lost my mind. I thought this was all some grand hallucination. I finally told Sky about it, and he said, "Don't be telling anybody about that for right now." I said, "Why?" And he says, "We've got work to do. I think you're ready to work the steps." And I was ready, and I read them, and they were so logical and made such sense. They should be engraved in stone, I thought. Something I'd ridiculed so freely earlier, and I started embarking on working those steps. And Sky said, "You've got to learn to give, and you've never given. You've been a taker all of your life." He says, "The home group needs ashtrays." That was back when if you didn't smoke, when you got here, we'd teach you how. He says, "It needs ashtrays. You consider yourself a scientist. Write me a paper on ashtrays." Well, I was a bit hurt. But I said, I'll show him. This is before computer searches and everything. I went to 2 major libraries. I managed to get 22 different sources in the bibliography. I even included anything to do with ashes, including funeral urns. I had it all down packed, and I covered glass, melmac, tin, pot metal. I went through the whole thing, including the cheap and shoddy aluminum. I had something on everything about it, and managed to get out 36 pages. 20. 2 days later, I stepped into Sky's car, and I said, "Here's your paper." And he threw it in the back seat without opening it up and said, "Good, buy 12 of the best for the home group." "Gee, Sky, aren't you going to read it?" "No, I trust you." I went out and bought 18 Venetian glass. I just went out of my... I show up, and I've got these things. I can't wait to show them to everybody there. And he says, "What's the smile for?" And I said, "Well, I want to show everybody." He says, "Oh, you can't do that." He said, "You got to take them back. We're going early before anybody gets there, and you got to put them back in the storeroom by the old ashtrays. And you can never tell anybody because it wouldn't make sense." I said, "Can't tell anybody?" "No." So we go out and get a little coffee and come back after we'd made the deposit. And they've got the new ashtrays out, and everybody's raving about them, and I'm sitting on my hands. I can't tell anybody. But afterwards, I felt good. And he says, "You've got to do that every day the rest of your life if you don't stand any chance at all." And I said, "Every day the rest of my life?" He said, "I don't tell many people this, but I do." At 9 months, this guy said one thing to me. He said, "Charles, if anything happens to me, you've got 24 hours. In 24 hours, you have to have a new sponsor." I said, "Sky, nothing's going to happen to you." And he said, "I know, but if something does." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you can't stay sober alone. You've got to realize that. None of us can. We're so interdependent on each other." And Sky left and went to Lafayette, a town about 120 miles away. And next morning I got a call, and they found Sky died of a massive heart attack during the night. And I had a sponsor in 2 hours. And I've never been without a sponsor since. Because I need you. And the most amazing thing is you need me. It is truly one heart reaching out to another. And from that time on, because Sky was active in service became my byword. I was carrying a meeting into a prison with 10 months of sobriety. I fudged it a little and told him I had a year. I did everything that I could possibly do. And I had a service sponsor. His name was David A. from Dallas. He'd keep me busy and tell me what I had to do. Now, boy, you got to do this next. I ended up GSR and DCM and all kinds of committee work. And interestingly enough, the next thing I knew, I became delegate for Area 27. And then to cap it all off 2 years ago, I became trustee at large. And I'm here to be your servant and to serve you. And I've probably gone over, but I don't care. Thank you.